Welcome back to True Crime IRL, everyone. Today, I have a very special guest that I am super excited to talk to. He's a Catholic seminary refugee. He's a professor of religion, and he's an author of the new book, The Empty Confessional. Welcome to the show, Tom Hogan.
Hi, nice to be here.
Thanks for coming on the show today. This is going to be something a little different than I've done before, but I'm ready to uncover some of these secrets and stuff of the Catholic Church. So you're going to kick off this series I'm going to be doing on the Catholic Church. But yeah, let's talk about Tom Hogan for a moment. So what exactly is you call yourself a Catholic seminary refugee? What does that mean exactly? I've never heard that term before.
Well, I was kind of a schizophrenic kid in the sense of growing up in the middle of the 60s and early 70s, and yet being also someone who went to church every day. So it was an odd kind of lifestyle, where I would be hanging out with my friends who were, for the most part, hippies and libertines, and then I'd be going to church in the day. And based on all of that, I decided that I still wanted to be a priest, and I went to a seminary program, studied religion, but, got up close and decided, this wasn't for me. This was a lifetime commitment. I wasn't ready for it. And so I did drop out, but I stayed associated with religion because I found it absolutely fascinating. But I focused on the history of religion rather than the theology. So I became a biblical archaeologist and worked over in Israel on digs, came back and worked at the Harvard Semitic Museum with their pottery, etc., and then wound up teaching a combination of religion and the Holocaust in Santa Clara University and UC Santa Cruz.
Wow.
So my experience with the Catholic Church started out very intense and very loyal, and then it became very dispassionate and very, in my eyes, clear-eyed. And I could see the church a little bit more for what it was as I got a distance from it.
That's where I'm at right now with the Catholic Church. I was, as a kid, I grew up like the Easter and Christmas Catholic, but my grandmother was a devout Catholic. My dad and my uncle went to Catholic school their whole lives. So did my brother. So we were a very Catholic family. As I've gotten to be an adult, my eyes are opening a little bit to some of the other stuff. So did you grow up in a really religious home then? Were your parents devout Catholics?
My father was. He was one of these people who was a street kid from Brooklyn, not religious at all, went to war in the Pacific Theater in World War II, had a number of near-death circumstances which made him very religious. And when he came back, he was very pious, never really enforced it on us, but it was just so clear that it was important to him.
Right.
And it was important up until the day he died.
All right. So you were a big fan of the Catholic Church growing up, and you wanted to become a priest. But when did that start to change for you? Was there a specific turning point or something that really caused that change from one to the other?
Well, yeah. And I mean, it's very odd that you can trace it back to the exact minute, but I would back up for just a minute because you were talking about your own involvement as well as kids when you and I were talking. In our will, there's not a lot of things that we stipulated, but I have two daughters, and I did stipulate that they could not be raised Catholic if we died.
Wow. Okay.
I do find Catholicism to be a very destructive force to females in particular, with all of its sexual, hang-ups, et cetera. So I just wanted to get that out there.
Like guilt, for one thing. They say
Absolutely.
Catholic guilt, that has been huge for me. For me. So yeah. Yep.
Now, I mean, in the book, I've got a whole chapter on how the church ran with one biblical phrase and turned it into a complete cult of virginity associated with Mary and beyond. And, it's pretty intense stuff for a young girl growing up.
It is. Yes, it is very, very intense. So that's kind of what changed things for you thinking about that, or?
Not really, because I'm not a girl. But I did know what happened for me was, I was over hitchhiking. I was only, in college, but I was hitchhiking through Scotland and England. And, back in the day, and still to this day, to a large degree, there's the expectation that you go to church every Sunday.
Right.
That if you didn't, it was a sin, maybe a venial sin, not a mortal sin, but a sin of consequence.
Yep.
And I had been up all night, on the roads, etc. And I got into Oxford where my friend was staying, and there was only one more mass that I could go to. And I was just dog tired. And I said, I'm going to go to the store instead and get some food and come home and just go to sleep. Mm-hmm. And I was walking past the Catholic Church on my way back to his house, already feeling very guilty for, et cetera. The bells tolled. And I was physically ill. I almost threw up, and I sat there and I said, this is not healthy. This is not what God intended. And at that point, from there on, I was not a rejectionist. I'm not proud. I don't hate, I'm not proud of my status. I just said, it's not for me anymore. And That was it.
That is a powerful turning point story. Wow. You remember it very vividly. That's crazy. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that the word cult. I've come to kind of think of the Catholic Church as kind of a cult lately. It kind of checks a lot of the boxes. So I don't want to, I don't want to offend anybody who is a, practicing Catholic still. The town I live in, everybody's Catholic, and I like these people, and I love a lot of Catholics in my life, but it's not for me anymore. So,
if I can interrupt for just a sec, I just finished an article, the title of which is "It's Time to Treat the Catholic Church as a Cult."
Oh so my gosh, I didn't see that. I read a few of your articles and read your bio and stuff, but I didn't.
No, this one hasn't come out yet. It's still looking for a home. I just finished it, but it starts off with exactly what you're talking about. And that is, if a new religion came into your community and then you just stripped away the word Catholic, but you said, the priests could not marry, they could not have sex even with themselves. Women were second-class citizens. Children were in a situation of exposure, and just keep going down the list. What would you call that group?
Oh, absolutely. It would be a cult.
It checks the box.
One leader who makes all the decisions and they trickle down. There's a lot of money involved. There's so many things that check all the boxes of a cult. So that I can't wait until that comes out. You keep me posted on that. I have to read that.
No problem.
Please do. So what were people's reactions? How did your family react when you decided to leave the seminary? How did your friends, were you shunned? Things like that. How did it go for you when you had that moment?
Well, no, everyone was, except my father, was, what took you so long? Including my mother, Yep. And I think part of it was, and again, even though the book that's coming out now, The Empty Confessional, is not autobiographical, it reflects the lessons that I learned. And what I found was that, again, the friends that I hung out with were very active sexually.
The friends, were they priests?
No. That's what I'm saying. Is I led that schizophrenic existence.
Yes. Okay.
Where I was the only guy in the seminary with long hair. I was the only one. I was the only one who had was still active with smoking marijuana. I mean, my friends were all, as I said, on the left, very seriously involved with sex, with drugs, et cetera.
Yep.
And the rest of the seminarians that I was associated with were what I had in that Newsweek article, what I called refugees, was
Yes.
the people who were hiding from society.
Okay.
Well, I wasn't hiding from society. I was still actively involved. I just was kind of hypocritical in the sense that, I would do everything up to sexual intercourse with the girls that I was friends with or associated with. And yet somehow I thought that could still keep me in good graces with God,
geez.
as long,
Wow.
the calisthenics, or the contortions that people do to stay Catholic is pretty impressive,
Oh, yeah.
As
Yeah.
you know, in your town, if you have a conversation, they'll say, I'm Catholic, but I don't agree with the Pope on abortion. I don't agree. I think priests should marry. I think, et cetera. And they'll go down the list. And you could say to them, though you get shunned, you'd say, honey, there's a name for you. It's Episcopalian,
Yeah.
But they would cut off their head before they deny their
That
Catholic
Yes,
background.
absolutely.
And, that was the group, so I lived one leg with, the guys who were, doing mescaline and whatever on the weekends, and another group that was cloistered in the seminary and wouldn't come out because they loved their little world. And I knew I couldn't, continue that way, or I'd be, schizoid.
So did your friends in the seminary know about the other friends that you hung out with, or did you kind of keep that quiet for fear?
No, I mean, it was not again, you couldn't be with a ponytail and whatever, and not be, and not hanging around on the weekends with the rest of the guys, running laps around the rosary. So, no, it was, and it wasn't a surprise. It wasn't a surprise to them. I mean, if how you have in high school, the awards for most likely to succeed, if the seminary had a most likely to drop out, I would have been the top of everyone's list from day one.
Oh, my gosh. That's funny. Did you cut the hair for seminary, or did you leave it long?
Oh, just, and there was no pressure there. I mean, you got to remember, I didn't explain, it was connected with a university. Okay. So the university lifestyle and the people that were there, I fit in, more.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What state was that? What state?
Well, no, and it was odd too. It was the University of Santa Clara, where I wound up teaching years later. But Santa Clara was an odd place to go because it was like a place that parents would send their children if they were afraid of the 60s. It was like the 60s and early 70s didn't happen in Santa Clara. The women, the girls were still wearing, they looked like field hockey uniforms, the plaid dresses. And, It was still Northern California. I was still, 10 miles from Stanford and 40 miles from Berkeley, which was where I'd go on weekends. But it was an odd lifestyle. When I left the seminary program, I stayed at Santa Clara because I loved the biblical studies program.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you went on to get your doctorate. Is that right?
My master's.
Your master's.
In biblical archaeology. Yeah.
Wow. So you were talking about the archaeological digs. That reminds me of a very Catholic movie, the movie The Exorcist, at the beginning when they're digging, So,
yeah.
But yeah. So the Catholic Church obviously is responsible for so many terrible things like pedophilia. That's the first thing that comes to mind. But you're the expert here. Why is it so rampant in the Catholic Church? Why are there so many children being abused? What is happening here? And why did they cover it up? And how do you have any anecdotes about that or any stories?
Well, yeah, I do. And I'm in a unique situation in that when I was doing my graduate work, I was initially at Drew University, which is a Methodist program, and they didn't have graduate student housing per se. So I wound up having a room in their seminary. So now, now I'm living with a bunch of Methodist seminarians, Protestant, middle of the road, and I could contrast their experiences with what my own would have been had I stayed in the Catholic seminary. And if you looked at, for example, the last year of the program before ordination, in the Jesuit tradition, you do something called the spiritual exercises of Ignatius, where you learn to become a representative of Christ on earth to basically explain the church to the faithful. I'm in the Protestant seminary, and they're taking classes on marriage counseling, how to start a youth center, how to teach Bible classes to the faithful, etc. So they asked me to do a presentation to their seminarians on the difference of ministry in the Catholic Church versus Protestants. Mm-hmm. And what I did was I drew an hourglass, if your listeners can envision an hourglass. And this was the Catholic model with the Pope, the Church, and God in the top of the hourglass, mm-hmm. and the faithful in the bottom, and that little, pinched area, mm-hmm. where everything has to go through is the priest. The priest's job is to interpret the top of the hourglass to the bottom of the hourglass, and then the needs of the bottom of the hourglass up to the top. But it's a conduit, and everything goes through that person. Now you can think about the stress that's involved in a job description like that. Oh
yeah.
Then I drew what I thought was the Protestant model, or the mainstream Protestant model, and that is it was two horizontal bars, if you can think about it that way. And the lower model is the people, and the top bar is God, and underneath the whole thing, with his arms like pushing up, mm-hmm. is the minister, and his or her job is to push the people closer to a relationship with God. He's out of the middle. He's facilitating a relationship. Yep. And that's a very different role. And now you start to think about, it's a much more secular job. I can marry. If I'm Protestant, there's no the same restrictions about sexuality, etc.
Yeah.
Now you take all of that and apply it to the guy in the pinched middle who's a Catholic. A, there's all of these restrictions on him. B, they cloister him mm-hmm. in a seminary for 7 years with a bunch of other people like him. Mm-hmm. I mean, this whole thing is a formula for warping a person sexually and socially, and then they say, and by the way, you're going to, when we release you, you're going to be interpreting God to everyone. You're going to be the most powerful person, in the community, and you're screwed up sexually if you haven't been, paying attention. We've been kind of isolating you from, society, and now we're releasing you into it.
Yeah.
It's not surprising that, but, in fairness, and I know that you're studying the Irish, and mm-hmm. we can absolutely get to that. But just yesterday, I don't know if you saw, there was a big release from the Southern Baptist Church
mm-hmm.
of all, so it's not, and it could have been written by the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. It sounds exactly the same. People in power, authority protecting itself, etc. So even though the Catholic Church is a perfect petri dish for pedophilia, you can see that other religions have that problem as well.
Yeah, I think people, if you're going to be that kind of person who is a pedophile, I guess, and who preys on kids and stuff, a lot of people go into things like being a minister, being a teacher, being a counselor, things like that, where they're kind of shielded by the institution. So, and it's just easier for them to kind of get away with it and creep their way in and stuff. So yeah, I agree with that. Let's see. Back to the Irish. So mm-hmm. The Ireland was like founded on Catholicism, basically. Right. So I'm going to be in future episodes talking about the mother and baby homes that were popular during that time, where, gosh, like 75% of all children who came into those homes perished and they were dumped in a sewer. Like, so, but back to the Catholic guilt thing, it's huge. It was terrible at that time in Ireland. And talk about Catholic guilt a little bit. And like for women, everybody was having sex, it just wasn't talked about. Right. But if you ended up pregnant, you were shunned, you were sent away, your baby was taken from you. It was terrible. And so that kind of thing has messed up a lot of women. Talk about that a little bit, Catholic guilt and how it is for women.
I think, first on the Irish situation, you're dead on to focus on that, because that and Canada both had those kinds of programs. The Irish were the worst of the lot. Mm-hmm. The most encouraging thing I can think about is that how much Ireland has changed in terms of its relationship with Catholicism is that they're just, they now have a very liberal approach to abortion, which you would never thought would have happened in And the other thing is, if you look at just numbers, John Paul comes over for a visit, and, millions crowd the roads, and the little Pope mobile rides by, and they have the mass in the packed. And then, fast forward to Pope Francis coming to visit. And Francis is a good guy, more or less. I mean, he's hamstrung, but I think his heart is in the right place.
Yeah.
And he draws 150,000 people at tops. Mm-hmm. And so, can I let my dog out for
my gosh, yes, you go right ahead. Whatever you need to do.
Back on the record. Yes, Ireland in particular has been encouraging to see that an entire nation can wise up and say, yes, we're going to be Catholic, but on our terms, and the church is going to have to conform to that.
Yeah.
And that's going to take some doing. But, you had asked for an anecdote about the church and pedophilia and whatever. And, I remember at one point we were, this was back in the 80s, and the AIDS crisis was just getting going. And
I read this in your bio too, the link about the AIDS crisis within priesthood, like Catholic Church. And go ahead.
Yeah,
sorry.
it decimated the seminary in particular, the numbers. And there was a monk who was visiting us, and we were asking how it did at the monastery. He said, "No, we got hit very hard
with AIDS. Priests, with AIDS.
This was the AIDS, and
this is something you don't hear about.
No, you don't.
Never."
And he looked at us, and he kind of smiled cryptically, and he said, who would have guessed that there were so many intravenous drug users in the ministry? Meaning they were denying the whole homosexual bent of the clergy. So the idea was in pedophilia. The Catholic Church is seeing a decline in both attendance and in the number of seminarians who want to come on board. Mm-hmm. And so, whereas it used to be, if they weren't American, they were Irish. Now, if they're not American, they're Filipino. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, at a certain point in time, it's kind of like, the nursing rate ranks being decimated by COVID, is they're having to import from, other countries to get enough nurses. It's the same thing with Catholicism. And when you're faced with losing that kind of base on two fronts, you can see, I'm not agreeing with it, but you can see why the church has become so defensive. And so it's closed ranks, because whereas it should be opening its books to the police and to the public, and it should be banishing anyone with a zero tolerance.
Yes. Yeah.
No, they say, our first goal is self-preservation and our second goal is power.
Yep.
And we're going to hold on to both of those with both hands.
So that's probably then why it seems like there are so many cover-ups of pedophilia and stuff. They just want to preserve their number of priests because it's diminishing so much anyway. And they don't want the Catholic religion to die out, basically.
Right.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about your book, The Empty Confessional. Father Gabe, the main character of this story. He seems like a cool guy. He knows Krav Maga. I imagine him being like very good looking too. Did you base Gabe's character a little bit on yourself, or?
Except for the good looking part. Yeah. Absolutely. That he was, schizophrenic in his own way, is you have a calling, or I thought I had a calling, and then you bump up against everything from sexual tension to the church the way that it is. I'm not an expert in Krav Maga, but no, it was, but certainly the idea behind the book is not that he is one of these righteous avengers. Yes, he does use his Krav Maga to effect against the pedophilic priests and the spousal abusers and rapists that he discovers through the confessional, but he's doing that in large part to purge himself of the frustrations and the guilt and the so it's not one of these Charles Bronson in Death Wish and my wife died and now I'm jumping into the town and getting rid of all the bad guys. It was like violence for him was a purgative. It was something that made him feel better about the disassociations that he had in his life.
Yeah. So it reminds me of a little bit of Dexter. He's like the Dexter of the Catholic Church.
Very much so.
And he's kind of a serial killer, really, in his own right. He's a priest, but he's killing the bad guys. And at the same time, I think, is he recognizing he's got a little bloodthirst of his own and he kind of enjoys it?
Yeah. So well, it's great that you did that. You had that association. For your listeners, if you pitch a script to Hollywood, you have to start off with 2 movies that it's alike, so you'll go on in and you'll say, in the case of one of my other books, it was like, you could say, this one was Something Meets The Usual Suspects, Big Chill, Big Chill, meets The Usual Suspects. In the case of The Empty Confessional, it was, if you remember the movie Doubt.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. You said that. Go ahead. Yes.
So I said, so my pitch was Doubt meets Dexter.
Yep.
And there you go. So it sounds like I was right up your alley.
Absolutely. So. I was doing some research and I was like, what is this like? It's like, and I was looking, Doubt or the Netflix documentary, The Keepers. I was like, it's like Dexter meets The Keepers or something like that. But I totally agree. Yeah. I really like his character. Is he going to appear in any books going forward? Is it going to be a series?
I don't think so. It was funny when I wrote the previous book, which was a thriller based in Auschwitz. It was about a Jewish detective who's forced by the commander of the camp to try and solve this crime. And, spoiler alert, in a very noble gesture, the detective saves people, but dies in the gas chamber as a result. And the people from Hollywood called and they said, well, we like everything except the ending. And I said, well, the ending, I think it's pretty strong. And they go, yeah, but he dies. And I said, yeah. And they said, well, that really eliminates what's really important to us, and that's sequels.
Yes.
And I said, what do you think? You're going to move him from camp to camp, and he's going to solve crimes. And Diffko does Stocktown, Diffko does Sobibor, Diffko does Treblinka. It's the same thing with Gabe. But you know what's interesting is everyone that has read the book or the script falls in love with the detective, the woman detective
Yes.
who's investigating him, because she's kind of a combination of really kick-ass and Columbo, this kind of shambling detective who extracts everything through the back door. And everyone wants a series of books about her. They don't give a damn about the priest.
Yeah.
He served his purpose in, but you know, it's an interesting thing because on the other hand, there have been people who've asked, well, why don't you turn this into a series where, you know, it's the two of them, the unlikely partnering of the priest and the detective, and, you know, the two of them join forces. So, you know, I'm hoping that I have hard decisions to make in the future with other people seeing potential that right now I didn't write into the
absolutely. And of course everyone's going to want Gabe and female detective to fall in love. Carla. They're going to want them to kiss or something. They'll want some taboo thing to happen. So well, I love that. So tell me a little bit, do you have any other stories or anything that you want to talk to my listeners about, or anything you want to talk about?
Well, I think the thing that I would say to your listeners is, again, you know, you go back to that, you know, I'm a Catholic, and you have the right to say why. You know, as a friend or as a, and I'm only saying that if the people are conflicted, you know, if they are happy and whatever. But again, you grew up Catholic. I'm not prying into your life, but girls and virginity and guilt and whatever. And I know something about that only because as you know, being in the seminary, I remember, you know, the first time that I did have, you know, sexual intercourse with someone, I felt like I had descended into hell.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
And I sat there and I said, okay, and I'm not a woman, you know, it's got to be even worse for them. I could still, you know, but it's like, that's why, as I said, it was in our will that, not that any of our friends would have raised my two girls, you know, Catholic. We just wanted to have it in writing, you know. I think it warps people. They have to dig themselves out of a hole in adulthood because the church has built a hole to keep them in growing
Absolutely. Up. My father-in-law passed away recently, but he was very outspoken. He was a very religious man, but he was very outspoken against the Catholic Church. And at the time, I defended a lot of what the Catholic Church stuff, and didn't really agree with him on a lot of things. But now I wish he was still here, because we would have some really good conversations, because I kind of see his side of it a little more. So I got pregnant when I was 18, and then had like the whole shotgun wedding thing. So, and it was in the Catholic Church. So, I had all sorts of stuff to confess and all of that. So that was pretty crazy. So the Catholic.
How old are your kids now? You had mentioned
my oldest he just turned 25. So
no, mine are 28 and 22. Two girls.
Are you still religious, or do you
not even close?
No. Okay. How would you consider yourself, your spiritual beliefs, or, you know?
You know, I'm open to anything. You know, I don't dismiss any belief system, but at best I'm agnostic.
Okay. I'm a cross between agnostic and deist, I think.
it's very hard for me to believe that there isn't some kind of higher power,
Right.
if
Yeah.
nothing else than just, looking out my window and,
Yeah.
but I also find it very hard. I mean, the Bible is somewhere between, 3,200 and 2,000 years old. And it's very hard. And our whole philosophy back then was to anthropomorphize God was just a bigger version of us, with all of our emotions and our faults and, all of our punishments built in. It's very hard to see that is the most accurate way, the most accurate guideline for life in 2022.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, the Supreme Court, what they call the originalists, are trying to interpret a doctrine where, if they didn't update their thinking, blacks are 3/5 and you don't have the right to vote.
Right.
So why are we saying, oh, abortion isn't in the Constitution? Well, neither are women.
Right.
And blacks are 60% of a human being.
Yeah.
You gotta evolve with the time. And I don't see a lot of the traditional churches doing that. I see a lot of the newer churches, that were built for this society. They have an easier time of it.
Yeah. Who do you think wrote the Bible? Is it the Word of God, or do you think it's just a set of morals and values to make a crazy place seem more orderly?
Let's stick with something that we know something about, because if you look at the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, boy, you've got a wide range of years and a wide range of authors. I mean, you're going everything from Exodus with Moses, which most people think of as 1200, BCE, before Christ or the Common Era, all the way up to maybe 150 before the birth of Jesus. So that's 1,100 years of different authors with different audiences and different goals.
Yep.
Even if you look at the New Testament, and you look at just the four evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, four very different people, never met each other, never met Jesus. And they all had different audiences and different things. And then you add some real interesting things like the book of Revelation, which I believe was written on LSD,
Oh my gosh. It's so scary.
Yeah, it's like, here's something that maybe some of your listeners know, but the point was, at the time where we codified, meaning that we said, this is what the Bible is. The Hebrew Bible was already codified. Okay, it's going to be from Genesis down to Maccabees or whatever. We had it. The Catholic or the Christian church, as it was called then, had all kinds of gospels floating around. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of James. These were all popular, like Marvel comics of that time. So it wasn't the authors that you had to think were divinely inspired. It was the editors. It was the people who 300 years after the birth of Jesus said, you're in, you're out, you're in, you're out. What did Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John have that Thomas and James and Mary did not have? So, it's very hard for me to believe that there's a lot of inspiration at work when you realize the years and the authors.
Yeah. Okay.
I do want your listeners to know of SNAP. The website is www. SNAP, SNAP, and they get some of the proceeds from my book. And that is a society that brings together and counsels victims of pedophilia.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
The other night I was having dinner with a neighbor, and he said, well, there's no easy way or delicate way to ask this. He says, I just finished your book. He said, were you molested? And I said, no. If I met a pedophilic priest in all of my time, I didn't know it.
Okay.
I was lucky in that regard.
Yeah.
I listened in to the testimonials of the SNAP survivors, and it's harrowing. And I think also this is a really bad generalization, but you were saying you live in a town that's almost exclusively Catholic. I'm assuming that's not on the West Coast then.
No, it's in the Midwest, Iowa.
You're either in some place like, Iowa, or you're in Pittsburgh, or,
or Wisconsin is a big Catholic state. Yeah. Yep. That area.
That's where I think, you're going to come up against these. I'm certainly not giving a pass to anyone on the West Coast, as far as pedophilia. I'm just saying that when a whole town hangs the moon on Father Mulaney or whatever, then Father Mulaney feels a lot more powerful. And then when you come forward, and say, I was raped when I was 12, by Father Mulaney, and they go, A, we don't believe you. B, why didn't you come forward then? C, why do you want to be tearing down the church in such a difficult time? And all of a sudden, you're the one on trial, not Father Mulaney.
Oh, yeah.
And if it's a tight town, you might have to move.
Oh, definitely. You'd be like, I feel like if that happened in this town, people would ostracize the victim and victim blame or whatever. It would not be good at all. I do worry about that though, with my kids going to Catholic school. I'm like, that priest seems a little odd. I don't know. My feelers are going. No, I don't know.
Don't blame you. I don't blame you.
Yeah. What else? Do you want to talk about anything else? Do you have any other stories or anything coming out? Any book tours? Any appearances or anything like that?
No, the book will be out at the end of May through Amazon and in Barnes and Noble. I'm not popular or well known enough to have book signings. They asked me to do them, and I just have this vision of me sitting like the ugly kid at the dance behind the desk with all of the books stacked from here to there, and there's no one in front of you.
That would not happen. No,
but no, I have a great group of such as this opportunity with you. My PR agency is doing a wonderful job of reaching out, and the critics have been very kind with the early. So hopefully, and as I said, I'm hoping it also finds legs within the entertainment community, either as a miniseries or a movie.
I think it's got a lot of potential for that. It's got all the ingredients of a good movie, good series, something like that. So I'm going to read it. I'm very excited to read it when it comes out. So yeah.
Well, keep me informed about the podcast and the Irish angle, because I'd love to just see as things progress, Kelly.
Yeah, I will.
I admire you for taking that on.
Thank you. I'm just a podcaster. I'm not a journalist or anything, but I find that it's just very interesting and just enlightening. I didn't know that this stuff happened. I did not know. I mean, if you're really being honest, like the Catholic Church in Ireland was in the business of trafficking children. Hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of kids were shipped off out of Ireland to the US. The Catholic Church profited off of this. So it's a whole thing that I feel needs to be uncovered. So I'm going to do my best.
And obviously you could have a cottage industry of just exposing the dark underbelly of the Catholic Church. But, once you're done with the Irish angle, you were talking about theories and whatever, and the idea of conspiracy theories, who shot JFK,
exactly,
is take a look at the the very short papacy of John Paul I.
Okay, I'm writing it down.
Okay, so if you remember, John Paul the 23rd was the Vatican II, and he was very liberal, very embracing, very much like Pope Francis today.
Yes, yeah.
A man of the people. When he died, the church 180'd and went back to Paul VI, who was this mean little guy who would have been just fine with the Nazis in the 30s and whatever.
Yeah.
He took the church backwards. And then when he died, John Paul I was installed. He was fairly young, looked like he was, but where people find a lot of conspiracy theories is he was, according to the theories, he was investigating the Vatican Bank and all of its dealings, etc.
Oh, okay.
And supposedly, and again, I'm not at all embracing this. I'm just saying. And then he dies like 150 days into his, and there's all kinds of theories that he was killed or that he had a heart attack, and by his bedside was a report of exactly what the bank had done and was doing and whatever. But it's a little more esoteric than, the pedophilia and the baby trafficking, et cetera, but fascinating.
It is. Wow.
You may want to just, it still is amazing to me that here's a church which has, it could finance itself for the next 50 years with just the Vatican treasure,
$15 billion, something like that is what they, yeah.
And then they're still, trying to get the peasants of South America to pay for the new gaudy church, that they're building. So it's bizarre, but no, keep fighting the good fight, Kelly. I will.
And I don't think that was a coincidence that John Paul I suddenly died. So that's something I will look into. And where there's huge amounts of money, there's power, there's greed, there's corruption. It's all there. And I think it's no,
the other part that was part of that was one of the chief guys associated with the bank wound up hanging from the London Bridge, either a suicide because of the investigation, or if you believe in the conspiracy theories, he was victim number 2 along with John Paul I. Yeah. So very interesting stuff.
They're putting a message out there. You mess with the Catholic Church, here's what happens to you.
There you go.
You never know. Yeah, I believe that. So, okay. Well, it was great talking to you, Tom. I've really enjoyed this.
Me too.
Yeah, this is great. I will keep you posted on the stuff I do. Maybe I'll have you back on the show and we can talk more Catholic crimes and conspiracies at some point. So
there you go.
That would be great. Right. And tell me again, when does the new book come out?
May 31st, I believe.
May 31st, so right around the corner.
Just say June 1st.
June 1st, okay.
To remember for your readers or your listeners. So.
And it's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And yeah, okay, great. And the book is The Empty Confessional by Tom Hogan. Get it, June 1st. All right, thanks, Tom. True Crime IRL is written, produced, and hosted by Kelli Behrens-Brink. Please subscribe to True Crime IRL wherever you get your podcasts and consider leaving a 5-star review. Go to truecrimeirl.com for more information. Support the show by becoming a Patreon donor. Go to patreon.com/truecrimeirl podcast. You can also support the show by leaving a tip in the TCIRL tip jar. Go to truecrimeirl.com and click on the donate button, or buy merch in the TCIRL merch shop. truecrimeirl.com/merch. Watch True Crime IRL on YouTube at youtube.com/KelliBrinkTV. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at True Crime IRL, all one word. True Crime IRL theme music is produced by The Captain at True Crime Garage.